They said the atomic age would save humanity. But in the shadows of its laboratories, scientists began stealing from the dead. In the year 1953, in the rain-slicked underbelly of New York City, a quiet genius named Dr. Willard Libby moved through the cold corridors of Columbia University Medical Center. He was a man of science, a man of purpose, a high-ranking official in the Atomic Energy Commission. But tonight, he was something else entirely. He was a collector. The city's pulse throbbed above, a symphony of progress and post-war optimism. But down here, in the frosted basement morgue, there was only silence. A silence broken by the scrape of metal on metal as Libby pulled open a drawer. Inside, a child. Small, pale, unclaimed by the world above. A life unwritten, a story untold, now reduced to a specimen. With the precision of a surgeon, Libby removed a rib, a single piece of the delicate architecture that had housed a fleeting soul. He placed it carefully into a numbered vial, a ghost in a glass bottle, and locked it away. On the clipboard he carried, pressed to his chest like a shield, a stamp marked the transaction in stark, bureaucratic letters. Project Sunshine. And with a click of a lock and the blotting of ink, a line was crossed. A secret was born, sealed away under the highest classification, top secret, restricted data. Above ground, post-war America was a nation, glowing with a new kind of light, the incandescent promise of the atom. The bomb, they said, had not just ended one war. It had begun a new era of peace, a golden age powered by the very force that had leveled cities. Nuclear energy, the tamed Leviathan, would soon power everything. It would light homes, propel cars, and with microscopic precision, even mend the human heart. It was a beautiful televised dream, sold to a hopeful nation. But to measure this bright new progress, they first had to measure death. Behind the gleaming atomic family commercials and the bright, confident smiles of politicians lay a chilling question that haunted the men in the laboratories, the men like Libby. How much radiation can the human body truly endure before it breaks? The answer was buried in the bones of the dead. Archival reels flickered with the ghost of another reality. The terrifying beauty of mushroom clouds blooming in the desert sky, a flash of white light over a distant city, and the permanent burned shadows left on the walls of Hiroshima. These were not just images. They were warnings. They were data points in a global experiment. In Washington, D.C., in the same year of 1953, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission convened a secret meeting. The air was thick with smoke and ambition. Memos, stripped of emotion and sanitized with clinical language, circled the table. The mandate was clear, its scope breathtaking in its audacity. We require human tissue samples, global distribution, bone, liver, spleen, teeth of varying ages. It was a shopping list for the apocalypse. A quiet voice volunteered to lead the collection. Dr. Willard Libby. He would use his students from Columbia University, a network of bright young minds, to coordinate the grim harvest. To mask its grotesque purpose, the project was given a name, designed to soothe, to disarm, a name that sounded harmless, even cheerful. Sunshine. But there was no warmth in this sun. It was a cold, calculating light. In a decade obsessed with control, with mastering the very building blocks of existence, they built an empire of the dead. From that secret meeting, quiet orders flowed like a poison through the veins of the nation and beyond. They went to hospitals, to coroners, to foreign embassies. Some were written in sterile code, others spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors, secrets exchanged between men of power. At the Children's Hospital in Chicago, a government technician, a shadow with a badge, whispered an order to a nurse. Unclaimed infant remains. Keep the samples cold. The Army courier leaves tonight. The nurse hesitated, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a moment of human decency warring with official instruction. But the man simply slid a government badge across the polished floor. It was not a request. It was a demand, backed by the full weight and authority of the state. What began as a quest for data, a scientific inquiry, had morphed into something else. It had become desecration. In the cold calculus of national security, consent became a casualty, a forgotten relic of a more innocent time. The Cold War had its own morality, its own dark logic. On a vast aerial map, red lines began to stretch from London, from Sydney, from Chicago, a web of invisible threads all converging on a single point, a laboratory in New York. The harvest had begun. Inside the windowless rooms at Columbia University, an unseen empire was taking shape. Steel shelves reached toward the ceiling, filled with countless glass jars, a library of stolen lives. The labels were a global ledger of the anonymous dead. Infant femur, Glasgow 1955. Adolescent rib, Adelaide 1956. Graduate students, the bright young minds Libby had volunteered, cataloged the samples under the watchful eyes of armed guards. They were told it was important research, vital to the nation's future. None were told the real purpose. None were told the origin of the specimens they handled with such care. They were cogs in a machine they did not understand, cataloging the fallout of a silent global war. They said it was for the greater good, a necessary evil to understand the invisible poison spreading across the globe. They needed to measure the strontium-90, a radioactive isotope released by nuclear tests, an element that the human body mistakes for calcium, absorbing it directly into the bone. The montage of destruction played on. Detonations at Bikini Atoll, radioactive dust drifting into the jet stream, seeding clouds that would later fall as red, toxic snow over Canada. As the scientists compared the isotopes, tracing the insidious journey of fallout from the bomb to the bone, a student paused. He looked at the tiny, fragile bones in the jar before him and whispered the question that hung in the air like a ghost. Whose child was this? There was no answer. There was only the silence of the shelves, the silence of the dead. The network spread, its tentacles reaching across oceans. In the year 1956, in a mortuary in Manchester, England, a pathologist named Dr. R.H. Massey received a telegram. The message was concise. Request tissue samples for joint research with the USAEC. An invitation to collaborate, an appeal to scientific partnership. He agreed, completely unaware that the parents of the deceased would never be asked for their permission. He was a man of science, eager to contribute to important research. He did not know he was becoming an accomplice. Across the British Commonwealth, the harvest widened. The bodies of stillborn infants, of accident victims, of refugees with no one to speak for them, were dissected. Their remains, pieces of their final silent stories, were shipped in the sterile immunity of diplomatic pouches to America. Across oceans, allies became accomplices in a conspiracy of silence. Project Sunshine spread, not as warmth, but as a cold, cruel arithmetic of human remains, a global audit of grief. But even in a world addicted to secrecy, guilt leaves fingerprints. In 1957, at the heart of the operation at Columbia, a young lab assistant named Margaret Harris began to notice irregularities. She was tasked with logging shipments marked as agricultural samples. But the weight, the handling, the sheer level of security surrounding these crates of soil and plants felt wrong. One day, a crate broke open. What she saw was not soil. It was a child's femur, suspended in a glass jar. The truth, in that moment, was undeniable and horrific. Margaret, guided by a conscience that had not yet been extinguished by the cold logic of her work, reported what she had seen to her supervisor. The response was swift and silent. Within days, she was reassigned to another department, her access revoked, her connection to the project severed. A week later, an unsigned note appeared on her desk. The message was 4 words, a command, and a threat. Forget what you saw. National security. The screen of her life, once clear, now faded to the low, oppressive hum of fluorescent lights, the soundtrack of a secret she was forced to keep. But secrets, like bodies, do not stay buried forever. By 1958, the radioactive dust had settled, not just in the bones of the dead, but in the teeth of the living. At the Geneva Conference on Nuclear Testing, delegates from around the world presented alarming data. It showed traces of strontium-90 in baby teeth collected from children globally. The invisible fallout was no longer invisible.
Anonymous.
A journalist, sharp and persistent, connected the dots. He linked the isotope charts from the conference to leaked Atomic Energy Commission records that bore a strangely innocent name, Project Sunshine. The story broke, and the front-page headlines screamed a terrible truth. U.S. scientists use human cadavers in radiation study. For the first time, the world glimpsed the monster hidden inside the miracle of the atomic age. The government, reflexively, issued denials. Dr. Libby, the architect of the project, testified before Congress, his voice a mask of calm reassurance. These samples were anonymous, he stated, his words carefully chosen. No harm was done. The cameras flashed, their light glinting off the lie, a lie that echoed across a betrayed and horrified nation. The moral fallout proved far more toxic than the radioactive dust. Throughout the 1960s, a wave of public outrage swept across the United States. Mothers, their trust shattered, sent letters to the government, letters filled with a terrifying question. Were our children taken? Churches, the moral compass for many, condemned the desecration from their pulpits. Protesters gathered outside the gates of Columbia University, their signs crying out, "Science without soul is murder." The age of innocence, that bright post-war optimism, was gone. The atom had promised a world of endless light, but it had delivered only shadows. Years later, the full truth began to emerge, piece by painful piece, from declassified AEC documents. The records confirmed that at least 1,500 bodies had been used, many of them infants, some harvested from abroad without knowledge or consent. Internal memos read like macabre shopping lists. Prefer younger bones for strontium analysis. The chilling pragmatism of the words revealed the depth of the moral void. Dr. Libby, by then a Nobel laureate, a celebrated man of science, defended the project to his colleagues until the end. It was necessary, he insisted. We had to know. But history remembers what science sometimes forgets, that necessity has always been the first refuge of cruelty. Decades passed. The Cold War ended. The world changed. But the ghosts of Project Sunshine remained. In the 1990s, the U.S. Department of Energy, the successor to the AEC, finally released the full uncensored records. The truth surfaced, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, painful resurrection of a buried past. In Britain and Australia, families finally learned what had happened to their loved ones, why graves were empty, why remains were never returned. An elderly mother, her voice trembling with the grief of a half-century, spoke through tears. "They said my baby was stillborn," she recalled. "They never said they sent him to America." The rain is falling again in New York City. It drills against the frosted basement windows of an abandoned wing of Columbia University. A janitor, a solitary figure in the echoing darkness, sweeps the floor. Dust motes, disturbed by his broom, drift through the lonely beam of his flashlight. The light catches on a single jar, left behind on a high shelf, its label faded but still legible. Sample number 472. Infant bone. Melbourne, 1956. Project Sunshine was meant to measure the reach of the atom. Instead, it measured the reach of our own hubris. It revealed just how far we are willing to go, how much of our humanity we are willing to sacrifice, when fear of the unknown becomes stronger than love for the living. The camera pulls back, revealing endless rows of forgotten shelves, a vast, silent mausoleum of secrets. The flickering light of the flashlight dies, and the screen fades to black.